Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I'm your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we'll continue the story of Astro Boy from the last episode. It's a folk tale from the Indian state of West Bengal. You'll find out how it's possible to get by on charm alone. And we'll see why, if a stranger wants to send you on a crazy quest to find something obscure that no one else heard of and for a reason no one seems to understand, it might be a good idea to accept, but only if you have the moon on your forehead and the stars on your hands. If you haven't heard the last episode, I do recommend that you check it out. But admittedly, in a story about Astro Boy, we didn't get very far with Astro Boy himself. We met a king, Bhola, who was desperate for a child and heir. He married a poor girl because she was destined to bear a boy and a girl. The boy, in particular, would have the moon on his forehead and stars on his hands. Hence, Astro Boy. When the children were born, the king was away. The king's 6 other queens, who were all evil, together with the wicked midwife, secretly substituted the newly born children with adorable little puppies. Exactly like how someone always manages to use a folding chair on their opponent when the referee's back is turned in the world of wrestling entertainment. When the king returned from his campaign, he was not impressed with the puppies, and he took it out on the queen instead, banishing her from the palace, even in the weakened state that she was in. The midwife had actually put the kids into ready-to-bake clay pots and put them inside the potter's kiln. We left it on a bit of a cliffhanger there, with the potter about to follow her daily morning routine of firing up the kiln without first bothering to check the contents of all those pots. But the potter didn't actually do that. That's because she woke up really late. She rushed to her workshop, worrying about upset clients who would complain if they didn't receive their pots on time. But when she got there, she let out a huge sigh of relief. The pots were all done. Her husband must have been proactive for once in his life. But that couldn't be it. The kiln wasn't hot. The pots weren't hot. They were just done. She quickly examined all of them until she found the one with the babies in it. And the babies were well and good. She and her husband had prayed for years for children, and now God had finally answered them. Not that she needed any further proof, but the boy had the moon on his forehead and stars on his hands. If that wasn't a sign from God, she didn't know what was. So from that day, the potter and her husband raised the children. They did put gloves and a bandana on the boy's head though, just to keep a low profile. Just in case the kids weren't really sent by God and were actually someone else's. Not that they doubted the word of God, but it pays to be careful. Several years passed. The children were now in their late teenage years, when one day their foster parents the potter and her husband, passed away. It was a sad moment for Astro Boy and Astro Girl, as I'm going to call them. They managed all right for a couple of days, but then they had a big decision to make. Astro Boy thought they should stay back and take over the reins of the family business. But his sister, Astro Girl, wanted to move on. Astro Boy said, "We already have the kiln, the clay, and the client base. We don't need to invest any capital. Mom and Pop's pottery business is just begging us to manage it." But Astro Girl had a better idea. "We must move on. A rolling stone gathers no moss." "That's what I was going to say in favor of my argument," replied her brother. "Okay, let's flip a coin." But they were penniless, so they flipped a button instead. And Astro Girl won. So the two of them turned their backs on a well-established business and suburban life in general, and instead moved right into the heart of the kingdom. When they arrived there, they hadn't a penny and no job prospects. But if you're charming, sometimes you don't even have to lift a finger. A group of merchants decided to help the poor orphans out. They set the kids up in a newly constructed home and gave the boy the finest of their horses, and all for nothing. All this was on the basis of charm alone. The boy's forehead and hands were well covered. "Didn't I tell you this was a good idea?" Astro Girl asked her brother. "But we have to pay them back somehow," said Astro Boy. "So go hunt food for them or something," replied his sister. "Now don't bother me. I'm going to go relax in the jacuzzi." So that's what Astro Boy did. He had a fine horse. He finagled a bow and arrow, and from that day on spent most of his time hunting deer in the jungle nearby. He was a pretty good hunter too. Maybe it just ran in the family. Speaking of which, that is how one day he almost ran into his father, the king. Yeah, the king was alive and well, and still spending most of his time hunting. When the king saw Astro Boy from a distance, by chance, Astro Boy's bandana flew off, clearly exposing the moon on his forehead. As you can imagine, it's a bit hard to hide something the size of the moon, especially if you don't have a bandana on. The king was stunned to see that, and his memory of his wife's fortune cookie came flooding back. But he dismissed it. Couldn't have been. His wife hadn't actually had any such child, had she? He did mention it to his queens, though, the ones whom he had not banished from the palace. They panicked and had a secret rendezvous with the midwife. The midwife swore the children could not have survived, but they sent her anyway, just to be sure. The midwife went straight to the potter's house, where, luckily for her, the Astro kids had been around to leave a forwarding address. The midwife went straight to their home and met Astro Girl. Astro Boy was out hunting as usual, and that helped the midwife. It was easier to trick one person than two. She presented herself as their aunt and chatted with her niece for hours. Somehow, at the end of it, the midwife worked into the conversation about how pretty Astro Girl was and how beautiful Ketki flowers would look in her hair. Astro Girl had never heard of Ketki flowers, but the midwife soon clarified that these were beautiful flowers widely available all over the land on the other side of the ocean. After she left and Astro Boy returned from his hunt, Astro Girl narrated the events of the day to her brother. "Was she for real?" asked the boy. "Of course not. You think Mum and Dad would have mentioned it once if Mum had a sister. Besides, she's not from a distant land like she claimed. She's just the midwife in town. I've seen her before." "Why did she mention the Ketki flowers, do you think?" asked the boy. "Obviously a trap. I don't think we should do anything about it," was Astro Girl's view. But Astro Boy thought that if this was a trap, they must spring it. They flipped a coin again, and this time Astro Boy won. He set out to cross the ocean. On the way there, he ran into a Rakshasi, a giant demoness who seemed to want to eat him. The quick-thinking Astro Boy decided to use the midwife's trick. "Hi, Auntie. So glad to visit you, and I have a present for you." That took the Rakshasi by surprise. And why shouldn't it? How would you feel if just as you're about to dig your fork into your pasta, the pasta spoke back to you? The Rakshasi was not used to her food addressing her as Auntie. She did not bite into him. Instead, she accepted his gift of deer and rhinoceros, which he conveniently happened to be able to carry on his horse. After a heavy lunch of deer and rhinoceros, Auntie Rakshasi confessed that she had planned to eat her nephew for dessert because he was so sweet. But she was just too full. "Well, thank you," said Astro Boy, and asked her how to get to the Ketki flowers. "It's a long way," she said, "but I can give you all the secret passwords and stuff. There are lots of dangers, starting with my brother, but you can call him Uncle and give him some deer and some rhinos and he'll be happy." "Why does he have to be there? If you can supply all of the details, what value does he add to the story?" asked Astro Boy. "Just for symmetry, dear. You met me, a female demon. Symmetry demands that you must meet a male demon too." That made sense to Astro Boy. He collected all the details of his quest, including all the secret passwords and ways to bypass the security system, and sped off in the direction of the ocean. He met and placated Uncle Demon and continued on. He soon came upon a huge forest full of thorny bushes. There was no space for him to get through, but he had the passphrase from Auntie Demoness. "Oh, Mother Forest, let me through or I won't survive," he said. He was careful to articulate the standard password substitutions. 0 for O and 3 for E and 1 for I, that kind of thing. Just basic cybersecurity stuff. It had to be that way. Otherwise, people might just stumble on the password. The forest opened up and made space for him to ride through. And in a very similar way, he crossed the entire ocean as well. Seeing as he was on horseback, and he had hundreds of miles to cross on the ocean floor, it was remarkable that he managed to do it in a really short time. When he got there, he realized the midwife had been cheating him after all. Ketki flowers did not just grow all over the land. They grew in a very specific palace and garden that seemed to have demon footprints all over. Weirdly specifically, all those footprints originated from 700 demons. I can't imagine Astro Boy spent time cataloging the footprints to determine the number of demons. He walked right into the palace, which seemed completely deserted, and saw a beautiful golden bed. And on the bed was a beautiful lady, the most beautiful lady he had ever seen. He cleared his throat, but the lady wouldn't wake up. Oddly, both at the head and the foot of the bed, there was a rod. He examined the rods, but by accident switched their positions. And that broke a spell and immediately woke up the lady. Her name was Blossom, and she already knew everything there was to know. She knew who Astro Boy was, his origin story, what led him here. It isn't really explained how she knew. Maybe she had some of my powers. Who can say? Blossom was completely fictional. Anyway, she quickly advised Astro Boy to grab his Ketki flowers from the garden and leave before the demons returned. But Astro Boy wanted to rescue her. Unfortunately, Blossom didn't know how he could rescue her. What? A know-it-all like you doesn't know? He asked. But Blossom assured him that she would find out. She had Astro Boy replace the rods in the correct position so that they would cast the sleeping spell on her again. Later, the demons returned and removed the rods to wake her up. Over dinner, she casually got out of them information about how they could be killed. Not in the most subtle way, but she claimed she needed to look out for herself. They thought she was getting a bit of Stockholm Syndrome. She asked, what if all 700 of them coincidentally died before taking care of her? How could she survive in a hostile world? The chief demon lady reassured the captive Blossom. No one can kill us. Well, technically, we did hear that it was possible to be killed by a man with the moon on his forehead and stars on his hands. But obviously there isn't any such person. I mean, who has a moon on their forehead? And stars on their hands? That just sounds ridiculous. But supposing there is, asked Blossom. Well, even then it's impossible. He would have to dive into the pond in the royal garden, extract a box from the bottom, take out the 2 bees in it, and take them out. I mean, kill them without spilling a drop of blood. That sounds pretty easy, said Blossom. 2 bees inside an underwater box with no oxygen supply? I'm sure they're dead already. No, these are magic bees, the chief demoness assured her. The next day, when the demons were away, Blossom relayed all of these instructions to Astro Boy. He dove into the pond, got out the bees, and crushed them, sting and all, and smeared their blood over himself so as not to let any drop fall on the ground. And just like that, 700 demons fell down dead. Astro Boy had got what he wanted. He grabbed all the Ketki flowers he needed. He also grabbed a couple of the Ketki plants. He would plant them again when he got home. That way, his sister would have an endless supply of Ketki flowers. He didn't worry too much about the ecological implications of introducing a non-native species back in his kingdom. Astro Boy also invited Blossom to join him on his journey home, and later on to join him on his life journey. She said yes to both. She was more than happy to do that, even though he was practically a stranger and was less smart than herself. Astro Boy's trip back home was easy enough. He used the same passwords to cross the ocean and the forest, and was now finally back home. Astro Girl, meanwhile, had made a new friend. It was the lady who was responsible for scaring crows and stray dogs. You may remember from the last episode that was really her mom. But Astro Girl didn't really pay much attention to the striking resemblance between herself and this former queen turned scarecrow. Astro Boy and Astro Girl and Blossom lived together happily. Just for a day or two. Because a day or two later, the king showed up. He had had a hard time finding this Astro Kid that he had seen in the jungle, hunting. But after making lots of inquiries, he had finally found their home. The king was convinced that the Astro Kids were his children. Blossom cleared her throat. After there were introductions all around, Blossom spilled the beans. She was a know-it-all. She knew everything that had occurred, including how the children were switched and how the other queens had behaved towards the Astro Kid's mother. King Bhola, gullible as ever, totally believed Blossom without even questioning where she got her information from. He begged his wife, now the Scarecrow Lady, for forgiveness. He was well coached by Blossom. Bhola also punished his first 6 queens. And from that day on, he lived with Gauri, who was back to being a queen, his 2 children and his daughter-in-law. They led a completely normal palace life. Except it was a bit of a challenge to play hide and seek. Thanks to Astro Boy's shining forehead, it was really hard for him to hide effectively. That's all for now. This is a folktale from West Bengal. There are some similarities with other stories we've heard before, especially the one where newborn brother and sister were swapped out by evil relatives. In the story, Blossom's name is Pushpavati, which really translates to blossoming. That's close enough. In the next episode, we are going to pick back up on the Mahabharata. We have covered the story of Shakuntala in a previous episode. While Shakuntala is technically a part of the Mahabharata, she is not part of the main storyline. In the next episode, we will finally dive into the main story of the Mahabharata. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. Thanks to all of you listeners for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next time.